Hello, my name is J.R. Harris, and today we're going to be looking at this drawing of Beatrice while we talk a little bit about fundamentals of art and laying down a picture and figuring out how to do that final drawing. So I start out with a good layout, and that is something that I always say to artists that I might be tutoring or just explaining to. And this is something that I learned from a few different really awesome artists, that having a good layout is basically the most important thing when you have a drawing. And I mean, that's besides knowing how to draw people, knowing how to draw animals, knowing how to draw trees, etc. That's not quite what I mean is that when you have a final drawing and you want it to tell a story, you want it to convey something, it needs to have a really strong, solid layout for the reader or the viewer to understand exactly what you're trying to explain. So take in point Beatrice and the scissors. And if you haven't seen Over the Garden Wall, go watch it. It's amazing. And I'm going to kind of go into spoilers here. So at least if you understand the story, the scissors mean a lot to this character, Beatrice, who's the bird character. And that's all I'll say about it. I won't go too heavy into spoilers. But when I was doing this layout, I realized that I wanted to tell a story visually, and I wanted to see the scissors behind Beatrice. And Beatrice isn't noticing them. She's looking in the other direction, almost like she may have heard a noise, and she's drawing the attention away, as if it kind of is. It mimics what's going on in the story, is that she's feeling a little lost and that she's desperate to help her family, and she's being a little ignorant about some things, and then her character grows. It's a great story. And that's what I wanted to show in this, is that she's a little lost and she's just trying to find her way, and her answer's right there behind her, is kind of the idea. But to convey that, I needed to make sure that the branches didn't become the focal point of the story of this drawing. The focal point is definitely Beatrice, and it's definitely the scissors. But to do that, I need to be able to have a layout that tells me that. And entangling branches and vine type things is really a good way to fill up the page, but not to necessarily draw attention to it. Because if it starts to kind of be a solid area of just a bunch of entangling areas, but then all of a sudden you have these nice wide open areas, your eyes are going to notice the difference. Your eyes are going to be drawn to the different thing. And so in this case, the different thing being cleaner open areas, not cluttered by layers and layers of branches. And that is how I approached my storytelling of the image of my layout, was make sure Beatrice and the scissors stay nice and open, and make sure that the rest of the picture has fun with these entangling branches. I think that's something that a lot of artists struggle with early on. This is something you learn, is that you're telling a story when you're doing a drawing. And I'm not talking about necessarily just sketching a character's face or a body in a sketchbook. I'm talking like more something like this, where it's a final piece. You spent some time on it. You spent time on the layout first, is really the foundation, is really what I'm talking about. And making sure that you're understanding that you are telling a story and you're conveying that story to the best of its ability. If you hold up this drawing to someone and they say, "Oh, that's a cool drawing of trees and whatnot," that's clearly not what I'm trying to convey. I'm trying to convey that, okay, who's this bird character and what's up with these like really weird looking scissor type things? It produces questions. And that's really what I love to do, is have this mysterious air to the drawing. And when the viewer sees it, they have questions, they're intrigued by it. If I had done it in a different way, it was very flat, the branches were everywhere, and you couldn't really see Beatrice or the scissors well enough, I've lost my story. I've lost my ability to explain and to convey what I'm looking for. This is really important when it comes to comic book layouts, when it comes to children's books, when it comes to paintings themselves, just a painting by itself. If you want to tell a good story, and it doesn't have to be something so specific as this, it could just be a very basic idea of just a mountain scene, but you want to kind of invoke emotion, layouts do that for you. And spending time on the layout is really what I'm trying to push here. And once I get the layout, I really start moving into the line art and whatnot. And that is something too that digital art is weird. It's different than traditional art. And if you're just starting out with traditional art, or I'm sorry, if you're just starting out with digital, and if you do have a tablet, which I highly recommend, because if you're doing this with a mouse, then congratulations, you're doing way too much work, but it's pretty cool. If you're new to digital art, it's good to find brushes that you like. I really like these brushes because they're very sketchy looking. They look almost like they are done with a pen, like an actual ink pen, or some areas like a brush pen. And it has a little bit of a harshness to the edges. They're not just a smooth, perfect. And it gives it some more personality. That's just what I like. But making sure you take the time to fix the lines. Draw that line 18 times until you're happy with it. Control Z, undo exists for a reason. And it's good to take advantage of that. Understand that it's a digital medium. You can manipulate as much as you want to. And I want to do a quick shout out for this portion, is that this approach that I'm doing here with the lasso tool is something that I learned from a YouTuber and comic book colorist, Color with Kurt. And I'll put a link in the description. He basically has some really amazing videos on how he goes about doing lighting and flatting and putting layers down, and just endless amount of content for you to learn from. And about a year ago, I really started following this approach. And I tell you, my digital art skyrocketed in quality and time management, for one thing. It really improved how fast I was cranking through these, because I was working with layers, because I was working with the lasso tool. I was being much more accurate with my colors and not spending so much time with a little pen tool trying to color it all in. The color decisions here were very important. And the way I work with color palettes is that I kind of have a preconceived idea of what I want to do. And I don't know exactly what colors I'm going to do, but I definitely know the color palette in a feeling sense. I know when I started, I knew I wanted the branches to be warmer, the background to be also kind of an autumn color. And then Beatrice is such a bright, color she's got varieties of blues and kind of like the peach tones of the bluebird. And that, I knew I wanted her to stand out the most. The problem with that, though, is going back to the whole storytelling idea, and not with Beatrice, but the scissors, actually. The scissors in the story are more of a brass tone, and that's very warm, obviously. And so a warm tone on top of warm tones, you get lost in it. And so the storytelling suddenly disappears as well. So there's a couple different approaches that I really like, is heavy lighting, changing like background tones, and you can do an endless amount of different things. And finding your own technique is something I really highly recommend. The technique I'm doing here is an interesting one, where I have a full layer of a nice like dark purpley blue tone that I turn to like a 50% opacity, and then I take like a full yellow tone and do the same, and then I go through and like cut out the purple tones of the actual lighting and delete it, and you're left with is a really nice bright highlight, a very strong lighting on the character. And I'll be making another video about exactly how I do that. But that really goes into understanding the fundamentals. If you don't know exactly how lighting works and how to properly light a scene and how different surfaces will be lit differently, this technique is going to be really challenging, or it just won't look quite right. So I implore artists to understand the fundamentals: lighting, perspective, anatomy if you're doing certain things, and design. Those are really the four fundamentals I really work with. And that is super important. It always comes back. Every drawing I do always comes back to some sort of perspective, lighting, design, anatomy, and anatomy could just be of trees, it could be of animals. It doesn't have to just be of people, especially in this drawing. And so it always comes back to those fundamentals. And certain lighting techniques you'll see is like, oh, that looks so easy, and then you go to do it and you're like, all right, why isn't this turning out? And that could be just your understanding of the fundamentals might not be as sharp as you realize, or something to that effect. Take an example. Beatrice's head is a spherical shape, and so shadow on a spherical shape will be nice and curved, especially with this type of lighting. If you don't necessarily know that, and your lighting looks really flat, like Beatrice's head all of a sudden doesn't look as round, but just looks really flat, that could be because you're not understanding her head as a sphere. You're just thinking it as a flat plane that just has light to the left. And a sphere has lighting going across it. And so the top of her head is going to have this nice little point, like a crescent moon shape, because that's how lighting is going to go across a spherical shape. So those are the kind of things that I'm talking about, is making sure that you're aware of the basic fundamentals of lighting when it comes to like a spherical shape or a square, a cube shape. And that kind of stuff is it takes time, but practice it and you'll suddenly be able to implement it in really fun different ways. One of the best things that I think it's the best and worst. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, is that I love duplicating layers, shutting the first one off, and just going crazy experimenting. Kind of like what I'm doing here. I'm shifting the hue bar just under adjustment, hue saturation. It allows me to play with the color, and the reason why I say it's a double-edged sword is because sometimes I'll forget that I have another layer there, and then I end up with like 100 layers because half of them are just duplicates. So I have to go through and delete a bunch of layers. So just to be diligent on how you approach that kind of technique about duplicating and manipulating, because sometimes you want to you do something to it and you're like, oh, I don't want to have to hit Control Z 80 times, and I don't even have what I had originally, and I really like that. Keep intact the stuff that you think you're gonna like, but maybe you want to change it. Maybe there's something about it that just doesn't look quite right. And that is something that I kind of felt like when I was hitting this point of the drawing, I felt like I was kind of feeling like, okay, there's just something a little off about it. And I had switched the hue to more of a light blue tone for the lighting instead of a nice yellow. And the reason why I did that was because I was hitting kind of a monochromatic vibe. The background was yellow. The trees were kind of a yellow tone. It was just really boring, and it didn't have that contrast I was looking for. And so to avoid that, I really brought up the blue lighting, but the strong yellow tone in the background still didn't look good. Just wasn't happy with it. So I did what a lot of people, I don't think, do. When I say a lot of people, I mean like beginner level artists. They don't take the time to experiment and have fun with it. And remember that this is some fun. And so what I started realizing was I needed to just kind of start over. I completely took the background to black and just started playing around with different colors I liked. And I kind of came up with this weird green background, purple, like tree mid-ground area. And then the branches in the very far foreground have a light blue lighting with like a red amber tone shadow. So we have a lot of contrast going on, but it's all relative. It's not too aggressive. And that's the only aggressive thing we really see is this nice blue lighting, which is still soft enough to not look too blinding. And so without all of that little experimenting, I wouldn't have really come up with this. So if you feel frustrated but you still don't really know exactly how to fix it, save it as another file and start experimenting. Move that bar around until you get to a point where you really like it. And this is kind of the benefit of like the different branches, like the foreground branches being on a layer, those background branches being on a different layer. I could just mess around with each branch set separately and really experiment, have fun, figure it out, and find the color palette that I really was looking for. And it really moved away from the autumn vibe that I was going for, but I realized with the color palette I was working with the scissors with Beatrice, they were so different that I had to just rethink my whole approach. And so being adaptable is another thing. Improvising, make improvements. You got to make changes. And if you want to make sure your art looks up to par with what you're imagining. And then last little thing I did here was kind of add some like really faded branches in the background. Not much different than the actual background color. Enough where you could see it, but it really helped fill in that dead space that was there a little bit. I was starting to feel that there was a little too much dead space. And so we needed to just make something like kind of fill that in there just so it was a little more interesting looking. And so improvising, being okay with changes being made, and just experimenting. I think that's really, and I probably said that twice, it's really important to approach it that way. And here's the full drawing in its wonderful glory. It took a couple hours, but it was a lot of fun. And so have fun with it is the bottom line. Experiment. Get creative with your color palettes. I started out with a very warm color palette for the background, ended up going very cold with it in certain areas. Then I did warm with the shadows. So it is a lot of fun to just let your art kind of take you along for the ride and make sure that you're not getting so caught up in, well, it doesn't look the way I originally planned it. If the way you originally planned it isn't turning out very good, or if you just don't like it, then maybe it's time for a change. So thank you for watching this video. I very much appreciate it. If you would like to subscribe to more of my videos that I will be posting, I will be doing some more tutoring videos on how I do some of my lighting approaches, doing some more of these time-lapse videos every couple of weeks, and probably doing some live streams on actually doing these types of drawings. So thank you for checking this out, and I hope you enjoy the next one.